Welcome back to the Scotti-BYTE channel, and this is Scott. So often I pose the question to myself, why exactly would I self-host? So self-hosting is an alternative to using common cloud-based services. And home automation users often use public cloud services for storage, camera footage, voice assistance, security monitoring, and if you think about it, many other things. So to self-host your services means that you have your own servers to handle most of these functions, and these servers can be anything from a small laptop to a rack-mounted server, depending upon what your use cases are. So the Scotti-BYTE channel focuses on the configuration and management of inexpensive infrastructure to provide virtual hosts for these servers and other functions. Gone are the days when we used physical servers to host things, and nowadays we use virtual servers. And thus far that's really been virtual machines, and that's why I spend a lot of time now talking about LXD containers because of their efficiency and low cost. So what are the positives for running your cloud-based services? Well, storage and servers are owned and operated by a cloud provider, so you don't have to worry about them becoming obsolete, and you don't have to worry about installing and configuring the hardware, nor do you have to worry about the electric bill for running them. So for a small fee, you can buy a turnkey service like file storage, video storage, security monitoring, many application services, or you can even go out and buy a virtual private server, which is essentially a server in the cloud where you can load your own applications. So the cloud provider keeps the servers and the software you require up to date. And public cloud service offerings are higher availability, and they often provide redundant connectivity in many different geographical regions. So if one server goes down, another comes back up, and presumably you have seamless connectivity. So what are the positives now for self-hosting your own applications? Well, you can own and control your own services that can operate independent of a working internet connection. That means that when your internet is down, you still have access to the services that you have self-hosted. And there is an upfront investment in the hardware, but there's no monthly fees for the services that you host. In other words, in general, if I want to stand up 2 or 3 or even 5 more LXD containers, I'm not going to pay anything additional because I already have the initial server that I bought, and I can simply add more instances to that server. So you're in control of when your servers and applications are updated, which prevents outages related to changes. And as we'll see later, I've experienced actually quite a few of those. So some services, like file storage, perform better locally, assuming you take the steps to back up your data properly. And hosting additional services do not increase your overall expenses, as is the case if you're out there buying virtual private servers every time you want to host a new application. So this question comes up on the channel all the time. I've been messaged about it repeatedly, and it is, can I just use a Raspberry Pi? So post-pandemic, the cost of a Raspberry Pi 4 and now the new Raspberry Pi 5 comes with a maximum of 8 gigabytes of memory, and you'd have to buy the power supply, the case, a USB SATA controller, presumably you wanted faster storage, and the SATA SSD. And by the time you're investing in all those pieces, usually it's a bit over $200. So the Pi is limited to only 8 gigabytes of memory, and it's not expandable. It comes with no storage other than going out and buying yourself a large micro SD card or perhaps a large SATA SSD along with the USB SATA controller. And it also has a slow gigabit network interface that operates not at 1 gigabit, but actually operates slower than 1 gigabit. So the Pi storage is hosted on either a micro SD card or a USB SATA connection, which are much slower than the NVMe drive that you can get on many small form factor mini PCs. So creating a Pi 4 or 5 based LXD server will probably host no more than about 5 LXD containers. Your mileage may vary according to the size of the application. And a fast and efficient LXD server benefits from 16 gigabytes or more of storage and more CPU cores and threads. So one of the other things that I've been asked recently on the channel is someone stood up a LXD server and wanted to know why they couldn't get a LXD VM for Windows running on that same server. And the problem with that was the fact that they were trying to run on a Raspberry Pi, and of course the bits for that were going to require the x86 64 architecture, and also they're going to be requiring more memory in order to run that. So again, we have a little bit different architecture. We've got the ARM architecture on a Raspberry Pi. Now, I like Raspberry Pis. I like to use them for home projects, and particularly projects that have a need for an analog to digital interface to something that you have in the home. So Raspberry Pis are great machines, but they're just not really a great virtual host because of the limitations I mentioned here. And so therefore, watch my tutorial that I entitled Cheap Self-Hosting Server, where I show just one example of a mini PC that comes by default with 16 gigabytes of memory and a 512 gigabyte SSD on a Ryzen 5 3550H with 4 cores, 8 threads, and it also has a 2.5 gigabit NIC and is only about $250 and can be expanded up to 64 gigs of memory. And now even its NVMe could be replaced with up to a 4 terabyte NVMe, which have been offered lately. So why exactly do I self-host? Well, I have over 50 LXD containers running various applications on 2 of these small hand-size mini PCs that really sip power and don't generate very much heat. And that's a priority with me. Both of these servers cost between $250 and $350 each, depending upon how I configured them, the amount of memory, and the size of the storage that I've placed in them. So too many times I've had cloud services fail and cause me outages, and that can be really frustrating. I've had cloud service upgrades break my services that I rely upon locally. So many times I have something running locally that goes out to the cloud to get a particular service. And if that service has been upgraded, it may not run the way that it ran for a long time. I like that. So internet service provider outages have also broken applications that I could instead run locally. And after all, if your internet connection is down, do you still want some of these things to be able to run properly? So I don't want to pay for each and every server instance on a VPS provider that I need to run my services. And in fact, that can get really expensive. I remember a small company that I worked with for a while. wanted some AWS instances out there on Amazon Web Services. We fired up a few applications. They wanted a few more. They wanted a few more. Before I knew it, they had a couple of $1,000 bill per month, and they said, "Why is this so expensive?" And I said, "Well, you keep asking for more services and you keep hosting more services, and they require more capacity, and you pay for that when you're at a VPS." So I like the great speed of running local services as opposed to accessing them remotely. It's really great to be able to have a service that runs on your local network, and it comes up much more quickly and is much more responsive. So what have been my cloud service problems that caused me to go off and self-host? Well, one of them, it was really kind of interesting. I use a couple of Chamberlain MyQ garage door openers, and over the course of, I guess, about 8 or 9 years that I had been using their application programming interface, their cloud API changed multiple times and ended up breaking the ability to monitor and control the garage door. And that ultimately caused me to go buy an additional remote, wire into that remote control, and connect it to a Z-Wave relay controller, and then the application could be locally on my network, and whether my internet connection were up or down, or irrespective of any software changes that Chamberlain decided to make, my garage door control and monitoring still works because it did not rely upon the cloud. Another example is cloud storage for security cameras from Nest and Wyze and other camera providers were getting more costly, and they were kind of inconsistent. And I didn't really want to capture just motion events from my camera. I wanted to do 24/7 recordings, and I got up to the point where I had about 12 to 14 cameras, and that was going to require a lot of cloud storage, to say nothing of the amount of bandwidth that was going to require on my internet connection. So Google Drive and Microsoft OneDrive are extremely popular ways, and there's several other storage services out online, but they always end up providing you a free offering that's too small, and then they provide you a costly additional storage option. And they do have their place, but I just find that if you purchase your own storage and base it in your home lab, and then also have appropriate backup to back it up to another instance, or even to do a site-to-site VPN with someone else and back it up over to a system that they have, and in turn have them back things up over to you, is just kind of preferable to using these cloud services which charge so much additional money. So inconsistent maintenance windows from my internet service provider, Xfinity, has caused me internet outages. And that can be really frustrating when I'm relying on a particular service and my ISP has a service outage and they haven't really told us about it, because after all, their, I guess, service agreement, the service level agreement, the SLA that they have with their end residential customers is not like what they have with business customers. And so they feel like they can bring the service down anytime they want. So Xfinity also charges $10 per 50 gigabytes of data that is in excess of your 1,200 gigabyte per month allotment that they give you. And cloud services, the extensive use of cloud services, can easily exceed this limit. And I know people are watching this and saying, wow, well, Xfinity doesn't charge me. Well, that's probably because you bought their Xfinity Xfi router, which then takes the limit off of this. If you are a user using your own router, then you have to pay an additional $30 a month on top of whatever you pay for your internet connection speed in order to get unlimited data. So why do they give you a unlimited data for using their Xi router? Well, that's simple because that each Xi router actually provides their own Wi-Fi service that is public as a portion of that is shared out to the public. And although it's isolated from your main network, my argument is I don't want to provide some other company services from what I presume is my own network. So that is something that I find problematic in terms of privacy and also in terms of the use of what I perceive to be my resources. And the same thing can be said of Amazon Sidewalk, and there's several videos about it online for the same types of reasons. So Amazon changes in Alexa software result in failures of my long established routines, and any of you that use Alexa know that you have these things called routines, and I have routines that respond to various voice commands. Example is location office, and I can say location bedroom, location family room, so on. And that moves the target location for various voice commands that I use. Another example I can think of is show me the radar, which goes ahead and pops up a radar map on weather radar map on my Google Chromecast on my large TV. Another example is give me a temperature report, which goes ahead and gives a summary of the temperatures on the various temperature sensors throughout my home. And so these commands have existed for years over here, and they've worked just fine, but recent changes have invalidated them. And I can give you an example. I can say something like, Alexa, location office.
Sorry, I'm not sure.
And basically, I have to go out into my routines and I have to change the phrasing of that command because somehow they have overridden it. And you would think that their automations would not give you a problem. Another example is if I ask for my temperature report with the command give me a temperature report, it instead gives me the local weather, which means again that Amazon is overriding my intention. And as soon as there's a possibility of having a self-hosted voice assistant that operates reasonably and inexpensively, I will probably be going to it. It's not that I don't like what Amazon provides in terms of data. The problem is there's inconsistencies in their changes that they make. Another example of Amazon making arbitrary changes is to the Fire TV Stick devices. So Fire TV Stick 4K, Fire TV Stick 4K Max are examples of those types of devices. They make changes in the software that results in the breakage of long-standing voice commands for the phrasing of various types of commands. Example, show me the front door, which was simply supposed to show me my front door camera, worked for a really long time, and I had an Amazon Echo paired with the Fire TV so I could speak to that Amazon Echo. Well, they broke that for almost a year, and when they broke it, essentially I would say show me the front door, and the Echo would respond that it can't display cameras on the Amazon Echo, despite the fact that the Amazon Fire Stick was paired with that Echo to provide that functionality. So instead, I had to change my command that I spoke to say, show me the front door on the Fire TV. And then ultimately that broke later on, and I found out that the new command was show me the camera on the TV. Now, after issuing complaints about this particular functionality once a month for nearly a year, Amazon has finally reverted back to the point that I can now say, show me the front door again. So this is just one more example of how a cloud-based service, you're out of control. They can make changes. Those changes can affect you, and there's really nothing you can do about it. So SMS text messages on cellular devices and Facebook Messenger, well, no big surprise there, were obviously being mined, because we would have family members where we'd be talking to one another and we would talk about something, and sure enough, we'd start to receive advertisements about those particular products or services that we had discussed in our text messages. And I believe that that causes privacy issues, and that caused me to move over to self-hosted Rocket Chat. And the Rocket Chat that I use on the Scotti-BYTE channel, I have private rooms for family and other friends in order to handle that in a privacy-centric sort of way. So have you ever read the end user license agreements, the EULAs for commercial cloud software? And I mean, have you really read them? Have you really read every line of what they say? I'm not going to tell you I don't use cloud services, because I certainly do use cloud services and I like them. It's just that I've found that over time I use them in more and more moderation due to the things that I've mentioned on this slide. So if you read those EULAs and you read them in depth, they basically give away your firstborn. I mean, you pretty much agree to provide them any information they want and allow them to sell any information they get to anyone they deem necessary, and that is troubling at the very least. So in summary, open source software provides so many services that you can self-host reliably at a lesser cost, and particularly if you start hosting a lot of instances. And I still want to access my music, videos, and surveillance videos and shared data even when my internet connection is suffering outages. An internet outage should not prevent me from doing what I consider to be kind of a core function at home. So cloud service providers like Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Western Digital, and Samsung, and there's a lot more of them, drive me through automated call assistance. The first line customer support that they have is always a voice assistant, and it's a multi-level voice assistant. And then once I get through that voice assistant, they connect me with an offshore call center that is reading a script and not really talking to me, and therefore they're not responsive to my issues and are generally unable to answer my questions. So I like the idea of web-based services that support both my desktop and my mobile use cases without having to install apps on every single platform. And when you have a self-hosted service, generally that's a web-hosted service, but that web could be local to your house, and it can also be extended to the public cloud through the means we've talked about on the channel multiple times before. So consider watching the channel to learn the requirements behind self-hosting your own apps, and really cut the cord. And cut the cord is always a term that's used in association with cable TV, but I'm going to challenge you to cut the cord on the use of public cloud services, or at least minimize the use of those cloud services and go out and start hosting some of your own services, which I believe you're going to have an overall better experience with that. Anyway, that's it for today. Please subscribe and like to the channel, and don't forget to hit that notification bell, and we'll see you next time.